some of you may have heard about 200 times over the last 3 days, we are the newest member of the Guidewire family. We're here to talk today a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and then how it's going to work together with Guidewire. This session is for you and not for me. I've talked about this stuff a lot. If you have questions, please fire away. With me is Joe Gerritsen. He will be giving you an actual demo of how it's going to work inside of Policy Center. I think you've seen this slide a few times already. We may talk about things that we're going to develop. You can't hold us to the promise, but pretty much we never talk about what we're not going to do. Here's our agenda. Who are we? Who's HazardHub? What do we do? Anybody here not know who HazardHub is? Oh, that's great. Thank you. Mike, see that, Mike? Everybody knows. We're going to give you a look at some results from some of the models that we develop. And then finally, we'll give you the demo about how we integrate inside of Guidewire. Properties become a bit riskier. Lots and lots of billion-dollar events. A lot of people want to blame this on climate change, and that may be a factor. A bigger factor is that people keep moving into bad areas. Texas has 16% more people than it did in the last census. Florida has 12% more. You got to put those people somewhere. And where do they go? To places where bad weather has always happened. So yes, climate change may be a factor, but there's not a lot you can do about that on a micro basis right away. What we want to do is give you the tools to say, people are moving into some areas that you might want to be aware of, have risks associated with them. And as people migrate to these areas, primarily in the south and in the west and in the desert, when there's an event, it's much more consuming than it was before. If you look at the Napa wildfires from 2017, the exact same footprint happened in 1954. The big difference, nobody was living there in 1954. A lot more people living there in 2017. Everybody's like, well, throw data at the problem. And as our chief scientist likes to say, all data is like a wild horse. You have to learn how to break it before you can ride it. That's what we specialize in. We break data down to a point where you can actually use it almost instantaneously. One of the things that we've done is we've always wanted to make sure that the data is as fresh as possible. And a lot of times you can't do that in a system because you're tied to a technology stack that doesn't let you update data on a regular basis. One of the things that we did in building the HazardHub platform is it's scalable and it's replaceable. So if I get a new fire station database, or if I get a new fire station update, or new fire hydrants, I can just slot them in, and you're already turned on to the data right away. So we are a data company that believes in open data. We take the opinion that there should be no black boxes in how we generate data. And we give you a lot of data. It's a lot of data. What we try to do is make the unknown risk known. We want you to understand what the risks are around a property so you can price it properly. Now, pricing is the ultimate end goal, and it's like flying into the sun backwards to get through the actuarial process, but it's possible. And we can tell you for any location in the country, whether it's residential or commercial, over 950 variables for that piece of property. Whether it's a single property or you want to bring in a schedule, and it comes back in seconds. If you're looking at hazard data and property characteristic data, the answer comes back in less than 2 seconds. If you want to add permit data, it takes a little bit longer, and it's about 8 seconds on average. Here's how it works. You give us an address or a latitude and longitude. Now, one of the reasons why we like using latitude and longitude is because that's where you think the property is. When we do studies of client files, we see that about 8% of the time, we think the property is somewhere other than where you think the property is. And that's a problem for you to solve, not necessarily for us to solve. But it is present all the time where a number of your locations are not necessarily where you think they are. So you give us the latitude and longitude or the address. We put it through the magical HazardHub cloud. It's an AWS-based cloud, infinitely scalable. So we can go in, dive in, pick out the risks, pull them back, put them in the API, and send them into your systems in 2 seconds. Here's some of the data that we have. Earth, wind, fire, water, man-made, and property characteristics. And yes, Earth, wind, and fire is our favorite band. Things like sinkholes. People think that sinkholes are a Florida problem, but sinkholes are actually in 42 different states, or they have the geology to support sinkhole formation. Mudslides, earthquakes. We do a lot of geospatial calls. So not only what is the risk, but how far are you from a specific risk? Like how far are you from the nearest fault line? Wind, hurricanes, straight line winds, convective storms, fire. We tell you the nearest 3 fire stations. We actually measure the nearest 5 from a straight line basis, and then we calculate the road network for the nearest 3. Because especially for you who write in either mountainous or rural areas, sometimes the nearest fire station is only a mile away, but you have to go through 5 miles of road to get there. We look at water. For those of you who write flood risk, we call it Floodapalooza. We give you 4 looks at flood. We give you the FEMA data. So we'll actually give you a link to the FEMA map if you want it. So tell you, is it an X zone? Is it a 500-year zone? Is it an AE zone? We give you what happens if you get the maximum amount of expected precipitation in a day. And then what happens again if you get twice as much precipitation in a day. We model that data and put it in the API. And what we see in the commercial lines flood claims is that about 93% of all commercial lines flood dollar claims are in F catastrophic zones. Frozen pipes, ice dams, man-made things, more for our commercial customers, and then property data. For commercial, we rely on the underlying assessor data. For residential, we also have MLS data on top of it. For those of you who use a lot of other pre-fill products, you will get the assessor data, which is not necessarily reflective of what's going on at the property. Here's how it works. Sorry for everything being blue. It's not that we're sad, it's that this is just the color thing that we had to use. This is Broken Bow Court, San Diego. The first thing that we give you are the basics. Where's the nearest fire station? We have had so many arguments with people asking us, is that the reporting fire station? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. Firefighters are built to fight fires. Firefighters only get to fight a fire, on average, once every 22 days. So if there's a fire and there's a department nearby, they're coming. Now, the rules of engagement will tell you who comes off first, but the nearest fire station and the network of fire stations are incredibly important to assessing the risk of fire at that property. We know this is a full-time station. It's in the San Diego district. There are 11 stations within 5 miles. Again, an important number, because that tells you what happens if you're the only station in 5 miles and you're busy, then your house is going to burn down. But if there's a network around there to get there, then that actually gives you more protection rather than less. We started out looking at fire because we were trying to determine the impact of fire hydrant networks on wildfire. And the answer is, after a certain point, it doesn't matter. You can have 1 million fire hydrants and the pressure drops and it doesn't matter. But what we started to do is to challenge some of the truisms around fire protection. And that if this is your zone, it gets a rating, and that rating is the rating for the entire zone. It's false. It doesn't correlate with losses. So what we did is we can't just sit there and say it doesn't work. We have to build our own answer to it. So we built the HazardHub Property Fire Score, which says, give me the station density, tell me the nearest station, tell me the type, give me the road network, give me the water network, and let me know what the relative risk of fire is at this location. This is what we call an HH1, which is our best score. If this property caught on fire, we would expect a loss of, on average, of about 26%, which is about $424,000 against the value of the property. We know there's 13 hydrants in this location. Yes, we've collected our own fire hydrant database. It's one of the things that people know us for best. We actually have a team of people who do nothing all day but find fire hydrants and enter them into the database. It is not necessarily the most fun thing to do in the world. It's a way to aggravate your kids on their summer internship if you ever need to do that. And no, we did not use any dogs in building the fire hydrant network. Dogs are too indiscriminate. If you use AIS, we also automate that function, so we can pass that to you. We can tell you that this property is 9.8 miles from the coast. And for those of you in the southeast, you know that there are multiple different coastlines. So we give you 3 looks at the coast. We give you the beach, we give you the low-res version, and the high-res version, which is because we're not interested in the coast, we're interested in water that's influenced by tides. And this geocoded at the address level. So that's the basic pieces of information. All of these questions you used to have to ask your customer to tell you where they were, or your underwriter sitting there on Google Maps trying to figure out how to make it work. We automate that process. The second thing is, what are the risks of the property? This location is a wildfire risk. In fact, it was inside of the 2007 Witch Creek fire. It's very high, it's very close to fuel. And subjected to katabatic winds, which makes it an elevated wildfire risk. And we'll talk a little bit more about wildfire in just a second. It's California, so there's earthquake risk. This is not as bad as some areas, but you'll still get a pretty good shake, and you may have damage on here. And for those who are in commercial lines, the nearest underground storage tank is 2,900 feet away. We've built a database of underground storage tanks for the US. I think it's the only one of its kind. And we'll tell you whether that tank is leaking or not as well. So if you're doing liability coverage for commercial insurance, you'll be able to say, am I surrounded by leaking tanks that I might have to remediate at some point? And it's the Alcoa electrical packaging location. Property data. These are actual pictures of the property, because when we pull in the MLS listing, we pull in all the pictures as well. So if you are insuring a new home or a change of residence for a home, we can give you the pictures for that location, so you can assess the quality of the interior just by looking at the pictures before you decide to underwrite that policy. Now, a lot of times you'll still rely on an inspector, but this will give you the data that you're seeing off of a Zillow or off of a Realtor.com. So for this house, we know it's a single-family residential. It's got a 3-car garage, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. It was built in '96. It's 2,700 square feet. We know who the owners are. It's stucco. It's got a clay tile roof. It's connected to the sewer system. It's got central air. It's got a fireplace. It's got a pool, forced air and natural gas, 1 story, and it last sold for $1,095,000. All of that delivered right away. Now, having recently bought a property, a lot of times you get the square footage wrong because the assessor, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, the assessor is there to collect taxes. The people who own the property aren't necessarily interested in giving the assessor all the information to try to get more taxes paid. On the other hand, you have the MLS listing where people are showing off the property. They want to say everything about this property. So what you should do is take the number that's the higher of those two. And that will give you a much more accurate representation of what the square footage actually is. And so I got a quote from a company that thinks my house is 1,000 square feet less than it actually is, which is great because I saved money. Our newest data set, building permits. We have just crossed over 100 million building permits in 47 different states. Every state's a little different in terms of how it's structured, so we're still working through a lot of that standardization. But what we do is tell you how many permits are there for this location, and then what's the total value of those permits if the total value is reported on the permit, because in many states it's not. We'll give you the last 5 permits that were pulled, because if you're looking at commercial property and you're looking at One Rockefeller Plaza, there's 834 permits on that building. We just give you the nearest 5. We'll tell you whether there's a cluster of permits that have been pulled, 3 or more permits for residential, 5 or more permits for commercial, because that usually represents some level of reworking of the home or the property. And then we'll give you all of the permit data itself as how it was filed. What it's for, the description, when it was pulled, who did the work, all of that data. And then finally, replacement cost. We partner with E2Value for replacement cost. For those of you who use E2Value, we use Pronto Lite. We send them square footage in year built, and they return a whole bunch of data to us. We love our partnership with E2Value, but people have very strong opinions about replacement costs. So we're very clear that this is what they are telling us, and we report back to our customer. So for this location, it gives you even a little bit more information. Replacement cost is $712,000 for this location. It's contemporary, it's above average, it's upgraded, 2 stories, suburban, built in '96, 2,700 square feet. One of the questions is, well, where do I use this stuff? How are people using this stuff? And for us, what we've tried to do with data, listen, this level of data has existed for a while. You know, this is not necessarily a brand new category, but we think that data should be like a television set, where every year you go into Costco and you're like, dang, that television set looks better and is less expensive than the one I already have. That's our goal, to be the television set of data, to constantly improve the quality of the underlying data. So you can use it higher up in the funnel rather than waiting till the end. Because this data can be so expensive from other providers that you won't use it until many times in commercial, until after you've bound the policy. It's like, well, it's kind of a little too late at that point. So one of the things that our customers do is they use it for lead scoring. For those of you who work with comparative raters, and you're not sure whether you want to bid on a location, you can set a screen on the lead engine to say, I only want to get these types of risks before I even quote those risks, because I want to avoid certain types of risks or certain types of accumulations. So we have one customer who uses that all the time to just screen those leads, and then they get the full report after they've decided to pull the lead in. Pre-fill is our most common application. Somebody types in an address, here comes the data. Our most advanced customer has reduced the number of questions that they have on their form to 4. None of them are property questions. It's all, do you own a dog? Does your dog bite? No, they don't ask that question. Do you have a dog? Do you have a jewelry rider? Is there something unusual about your house? And what's the condition of the inside of your house? All of the property level data that they use to rate is pulled from us, so they never have to ask the customer the question. That customer had a loss ratio in cat-exposed areas of 63 last quarter. So they're using this data to find the right risks for themselves. Risk selection, this is what we like to call risk triage, where something comes in the door, because listen, you can't just say I'm not going to write anything unless it's the safest thing of all, because you won't get enough premium. So what you can do is, though, say, if you're an A, B, and C, then you pass through automatically. If you're a D or an F, then you kick to a specialty underwriter, and maybe we go get a satellite image. Maybe we get some more data. And use it as triage so you can do more straight-through processing. Pricing is the ultimate goal of our tools. It's the slowest of all. For those of you who are actuaries, I understand. You have a lot of weight on your shoulder. But a lot of actuarial models have a gigantic hole in them. And the hole is that the actuaries use perfect information to build the rates, but then you can't get that perfect information in the field. So you have to ask your customers, well, how can I get this information? So what we do is we give you the data so you can build actuarial models based upon data that's actually retrievable in the real world. And then finally, risk retention. In California, you can reduce your footprint by 10% without running afoul of the state DOI. Which 10%? Which ones represent the most possible risk for you in a particular location? Our friends from Mercury gave us a very nice quote. We generally take a very hands-off approach with our customers. We don't ask them what they're doing. They volunteered this as part of the press release that we put out. And they use us because of the accuracy and overall value of our data. So results. Building all the models in the world doesn't matter if they don't work. We've done this before, by the way. The 3 co-founders of HazardHub built most of CoreLogic spatial data. So we've done this before. We know how it works. This is California wildfire. We're going to focus on a couple of things. First of all, this is the portion of the population in California that's subjected to wildfire. Fs are the worst risks. 8.5% of the population lives in an F zone, although it does represent 24% of the housing starts in the last 3 years in California are in F zones. F zones are tough. If you're in an F zone, it's just a matter of time until something's going to happen with your property in wildfire. Because when you look at the results of losses, we have a sample of roughly 48,000 burned properties in California. 89% of them are in F zones. That's where the risk is. Now, you can write D zones. You might want to take a little more specialized underwriting, make sure the trees are cleared and all that stuff. But F zones are the problem in California. We tell you that right away. In fact, it's a micro problem in California, where 44% of the destroyed properties come from less than 1% of the population. So when you talk about taking on excessive risk, that's where you start. You start with that 1% and say, well, that's going to go to the E&S market, or the FAIR Plan's going to handle that one. But 93% of destroyed property comes from 10% of the population. It's a very localized risk. One of our clients tied our wildfire model to AALs, and they found that the difference between the highest and lowest segment was a factor of 100. And the nearest competitor could only get to a value of 4. So if you want to have pricing flexibility, these are the types of tools that you can use to give you incredible pricing flexibility inside of markets that are peril-oriented. Well, what about hurricane? You know, wildfire is great, but it's largely limited to the West Coast and some areas in the East Coast. What about hurricanes? Bigger problem. We were part of Lloyd's lab last year and did a study that showed that 96% of all claim dollars came from F hurricane zones on the East Coast. And it's a pattern that repeats itself over and over. Talked a little bit earlier about the property fire score model. The HH1, the average paid claim to the value of the property is about 15%. And it lines up nice and orderly. There's a little bit of noise in the middle, but not too much. So when you look at that graphically, this is an R squared of 0.96, which some people think is a little bit unbelievable, but that's what Excel told me the number was. So I'll believe Excel. Excel rules the world. But this, if you compared this to, say, another commonly used fire protection score, it's bumpy. The correlation on their score is a 0.45, twice as linear as the nearest competitive system. We had talked about multiple properties. One of the things that you get from us is you don't have to ingest data. We do the ingesting on our side. Your API is always calling the freshest data. Now, for some people, that represents a problem. They're like, tell me what this was 5 years ago so I can know whether I should have written it or not. And I understand that analysis. But we take a slightly different opinion. You're doing one of two things. You're deciding, do I want this risk or do I want to keep this risk? Those are the two areas where we function, so we always want to have current day data. We do not store a historical archive at this time. You can, but we don't right now. So what I'd like to do right now is to bring up Joe. We are integrated with Policy Center as of Dobson. It's what we'll call a stage 1 integration. So all of our risks with grades will be integrated into Policy Center. We do have an integration with Insurance Now already built. So if you're an Insurance Now customer, that integration is already built. And we will be integrating with Claim Center in Elysian. How do you, the e-release, which is next. And that's part of the safe harbor. We're not exactly sure exactly how that's going to look, but that's the chance to bring in all of the data at that point. So Joe, if you could come on up.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is show you a quick example of how we've integrated HazardHub into Policy Center. I'm going to do a couple of different things. First, I'm going to show you a view that would be essentially what an underwriter would see. talk through some of the use cases and some of what we're going to do in the future, which will match up with what Bob was showing earlier a couple of slides ago, some of the use cases. And then I'm going to show you how we did it, the tools that we used to integrate this so you know you can do it quickly and configure it. To start with, I'm going to show you the underwriter's view. When I come in, I can go to an existing account and quote that I've already created. In my case, I chose commercial property. You could do homeowners, anything that's a property risk, as you can imagine. And I've already filled out the information, so you don't have to see me do all of that. But it's essentially a pretty basic commercial property, one building, one location. Everything's pretty standard here. And then when I get to my risk analysis screen, I can come over to a HazardHub tab, and it's going to give me additional information. The first screen that I come to shows what we call the most relevant factors. I'm going to show you how you can configure this a little later on, but essentially you can determine which factors are most relevant to your users and show them on a screen. So think of this as a lot like the headline, right? These are the things that you want to make sure that everybody looks at, and it can be based on underwriter input, models, anything that makes you think that these are the big pieces of information that they need to be looking at. The reason that we set it up this way is, as Bob said, it's a lot of data, right? And we've been told that the average underwriter is not just going to scroll through every single piece of information that's out there. You want to give them a good, quick hit so they understand which elements are most relevant to them and can look at those. However, if you want, you can click over and see more of the data as it's coming in. So here you can see a longer list that has all of the factors and their risk. And the way this one is set up is a fairly basic use case, right? What you're doing is you're giving this information to the underwriter so they can make decisions. And that can be manual pricing. It could be something where you're just allowing them to make some sort of underwriting decision, rate, refer, reject, right? So this is the simple use case of just bringing the data, showing it to somebody, and allowing them to do something with it. The next steps of this are going to be bringing in those grades, also making it where there's more work that goes within the underwriting workflow. Another use case that you can have here is that we can include specific factors. If they have certain scores, we can send them to a higher level underwriter, for instance, or make sure that somehow the policy is flagged, and that way you understand that before they ever get in there. Of course, the last thing you can do, and the other thing that we're going to eventually add in here, is the ability to include this directly within pricing as well. And that can be pricing. It could also be other models as well, technically. So what we want to do is make sure that all of these work together as a simple ecosystem that your users can use, look at this information. They don't have to be data scientists to understand it, and it's useful, impactful right away for them. So pretty cool stuff. The other thing that I really like about this is how we did it. Now I'm going to log in as what we call a super user within Policy Center. Think of this as a user that's not your typical day-to-day business user, but more like a business analyst who helps set up the system, right? We have an admin screen. It's called Analytics Manager. And from our Analytics Manager tab, what we can do here is we can pull in both things like HazardHub that are bringing in data and predictive models where you're calling out to them from an API and getting responses back. And the reason we've set this up is to make sure that we can do configuration for you. You can set these screens up. You can do it quickly, easily, without it being a huge project, but also you can configure it and make it look the way you want. So if I click on what I was just showing the underwriter view of, I'm going to hit edit here. I can set a business group and function. This is going to set up where it shows, what screen this is going to show on. I can set how I want to configure it. If I want to do something beyond what we have in our analytics manager, you can still use Studio to use code to do it. I can set what entity we're scoring, and I can set what's the triggering action. So when are we going to call out here? Do you want to do it at the submission creation like I've done? That's going to take in the account address and immediately feed that in, and then update each time it goes through different parts of the quote. You can also do it at quoting, at rating, at binding. You can call out for this information whenever you want. And you can, again, set it up here just by choosing a triggering action within a dropdown. You can also set the appearance on the screen. What information do you want to show and what do you want to hide? That makes it a little easier to set up for your different users depending on how you want to use these risks and their factors. There's obviously the call out to the credentials where you can validate those within here. So we have the URL, and then we have the authentication token that you need to call out and get the responses back. Where it's applicable, what jurisdictions, what products. And then within here, I have a tab that also allows me to set up those risk factors. So again, you can set up how those screens look. You can decide what's going to show, what's going to hide for your clients. Really good stuff to allow an underwriter to see what you want them to see and to pull the biggest pieces of information that are most impactful for you. And last but not least, we can also give you a list of submissions that are currently using HazardHub and have information on those screens. That way, if somebody needs to come in and export a list of where you're actually using this, you can do that quickly. You can see here that I've essentially only done that 3 times, and twice it's on a barbecue joint. But if you had a lot of information, you could export all of that, and it would be incredibly useful. So just a quick way to show, we can give the information to the underwriters. We can set these up very quickly by giving the integration to you quickly, making these tools fast and easy to use within Policy Center.
So one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of a use case. The reason why we started this company is because of my former mother-in-law. She lived on a river in Massachusetts, and the river flooded, and she had a big loss on her property. And the insurance company didn't tell her because they don't cover flood. The bank didn't tell her because she wasn't in the flood zone. She was right next to it. And I thought, well, that's stupid. Let's fix this problem. And that's how the idea for the company started. Our idea is that this is information that you should give to your insureds if you can, because the best claim is the one you never have. And so when I applied for insurance last week with 3 different companies, not one of them talked about the inherent risks of the property. Now, I had my HazardHub report, and I said, have you had an ice dam at this property? They're like, yep, we had one in 2017. Has it flooded? Yep, we had one in 2012. Have you had a radon test done? No, we haven't. So I had a radon test done. It was over on radon. We had to put a remediation system in. It's like, this is the kind of stuff that I think we all have an opportunity to share with our insureds to make sure that they're taking the steps so that these claims never happen. My mother-in-law never would have had a claim if you just changed your sump pump batteries. Little things can make a big difference, and knowing what those risks are and knowing what those hazards are can go a long way to helping make sure you never get a claim in the first place. Thank you very much for coming.